The Capitals and Peter Laviolette mutually agree to part ways.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this bonus edition of Locked On Capitals. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms. And I want to thank you for making this your first listen or view of the day. Yes, this podcast is also available in video form, so head on over to YouTube and check it out. My name is Dan Holney. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So it happened today. News just breaking that the Washington Capitals and coach Peter Laviolette have mutually agreed to part ways. And this was one of the things that we spoke about for quite some time, wondering when this is going to happen. And as it turns out, today was the day. And for me, you got to think to a certain extent, did that have to do with what was going on in Pittsburgh today? As we know that they moved on from Burke and Hextall there, the president and GM from that team. How much did that factor in with what the Capitals are doing right now? That is the question. Also, Dallas Eakins, the head coach of the Anaheim Ducks, was also relieved of duty. So it kind of draws into question. The timing for me is a bit interesting. You'll have to forgive me as this news is just kind of coming in at me right now as I do this program here. But an interesting thing. I ultimately didn't think the Capitals were going to make any moves until after breakdown day, until we heard from the players, until we heard about, what was going on. But it seems like, Peter Laviolette was frustrated. It seems like the Capitals were frustrated. And I guess kind of why I'm tying it into the whole Pittsburgh thing is we know that we are bitter rivals with the Penguins. We know that they didn't get their goal. They didn't reach their goal of making it to the playoffs for the first time in a long time. And so did the Capitals. And I think to a certain extent, the Caps felt like, well, that was their move. What are we going to do? Are we going to go into next season with Peter Laviolette as a head coach, being that Pittsburgh and the Fenway group is just shaking things all up out there? So some interesting moves around the NHL in general. I guess the move from Dallas Eakins for the Anaheim Ducks is not too surprising, as the Ducks did not really live up to potential. But in a release here, they said, "We are grateful for Peter's leadership and dedication to our organization for the last 3 seasons," said McClellan. "Peter is a first-class individual who has represented our club with integrity and guided our team through many difficult circumstances in his tenure as our head coach. We wish him all the best moving forward." And I guess, Peter Laviolette, I don't know if we'll have any interview with him coming up to hear what his thoughts are on it, but it seems like it was, Peter Laviolette said, "This isn't working out for me here. I've kind of been up against it and I didn't have any reinforcements. This team faced a lot of injuries all season. I don't think that is anything, earth shaking or, crazy thing to say. I think we all know that injuries played a huge role in the Capitals' lack of success this season. How much better would the Caps have been with Wilson and Backstrom and Oshie and Carlson in there the entire season?" And once again, the knee-jerk reaction is to fire the head coach. I'm just going to go on the record here. I don't agree with it. I understand the thought process that went behind it, but I don't agree with it. Peter Laviolette is the winningest born U.S. NHL coach. He also ranks 8th for all-time wins as a head coach. Those guys don't exactly grow on trees. Who is going to be up for the task of taking on this team next season? There has been quite a bit of rumors out there about Jeff Halpern or perhaps Spencer Carberry, amongst many other names out there that could potentially be a good fit for this Caps team. Some of the other things out there is I'm hearing is that the Caps didn't move on from Evgeny Kuznetsov because the thought is that with a new head coach, that potentially they could squeeze that orange and get some more juice out of it. That Evgeny Kuznetsov is just kind of an untapped talent that Peter Laviolette misutilized. So if they bring in a new coach, wouldn't it be something if all of a sudden Kuznetsov caught fire? I'm going to go ahead and cross his name off the list of players that are going to move out of Washington this offseason. Also, some question marks for me with Anthony Mantha. He has 1 year left on his deal. Is the thought process out there now, if we get a new head coach in here, that maybe Mantha and Kuznetsov all of a sudden will be these great players? It is intriguing to think about. All right, so after the break here, we will talk a little bit more about Peter Laviolette's record, what went right with him in DC, and what went wrong. We'll talk about that next. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part fits just right the first time. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know where the part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win with the right parts guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. All right, welcome back into this bonus edition of Locked On Capitals. In this edition, we are talking about how head coach Peter Laviolette and the Washington Capitals have mutually parted ways. And what does that mean for this team going forward? This was a piece here in The Athletic. The Caps are parting ways with Peter Laviolette. The franchise announced Friday. Here's what we know so far. Laviolette has been with Washington since 2020, compiling a 115, 78, and 27 record over 3 seasons. The Capitals finished this season 35, 37, and 10, their most losses since the 06-07 season. Laviolette led Carolina to the Stanley Cup title in 06-07 and ranks 8th all-time in coaching wins. Laviolette's contract expires in June, and the Capitals announced that the parting was mutual. Taking a look at it, I think that, one of the things I will remember positively about head coach Peter Laviolette is he helped guide this team through a really tough time. And what do I mean when I say that? It takes a certain character and it takes a certain skill set to get a team that's facing that many injuries and get a winning product out there. I understand that they didn't make it to the playoffs, but they weren't too far out of a second wild card spot there. So it's not like they were cellar dwellers. It's not like they were the Blackhawks or the Blue Jackets or the Anaheim Ducks. This team, all things considered, still played pretty darn good. And you can thank that in large part to Peter Laviolette's leadership. Now, the questions remain now is, are they going to wipe a clean slate and move on from the assistant coaches? We know that Blaine Forsythe has been here for quite some time. And then we know the other assistant coaches on the team. It's my belief that if they move on from Peter Laviolette, then they should just wipe it all clean and start with all new assistants that are approved by the next head coach. Because if you're kind of just, pulling along these coaches that you're not familiar with, I think that kind of offsets, the thought process. When Barry Trotz was here, he brought in a lot of his assistant coaches. So it was a cohesive unit. He brought in his own goalie coach, Mitch Korn. So I think that whoever the next head coach is, let's just give them every tool that they need at their disposal. Any head coach, if we're going to be in the winning business, then let's be in the winning business and let's, give this next head coach, whoever that may be, the tools that are necessary to help guide this team. But I do believe that this is the first, change among many. And it's interesting. It happened a day after the season concluded. So it is very interesting to me that it's all wrapped up. Same thing with Pittsburgh. There's no one messing around, and it is still my belief that there was a bit of a correlation there. They saw what was going on in Pittsburgh, and the Capitals felt like they needed to keep up with that change and whatever that may be. Some interesting questions around the Metro Division. As we know, the Penguins are an older team. Malkin and Kuznetsov, or Malkin and Crosby and Gensel, a lot of older players on that team. Some of their building blocks are getting older. Same thing goes for the Capitals. You take a look at Oshie and Backstrom and some of these other players out here. Are you going to start to see big changes throughout the Metro Division? Are you going to see it on the teams that missed it for the first time in a long time? I'm going to talk, primarily here about the Penguins and the Capitals. That I think that this is just the beginning of things to see to come in Pittsburgh. I also think you're going to see huge changes this offseason with the Caps as well. As both teams have missed the playoffs for the first time in a long time. This is the first time in a long time that Ovi and Crosby are not playing in the postseason. It seems kind of odd to me. It's kind of like a true changing of the guard. So I think what's going to happen is they're going to try to retool on the fly, both teams, and try to get them competitive. Am I going to say that the Caps are going to be competitive next season? Are they going to make it to the playoffs next season? Listen, anything is possible if we have a full season with Backstrom and Wilson and Carlson. Even though the team is aging, do they have enough fuel in the tank to push this thing across the finish line and at least make it to the playoffs? At least the first round. Forget about making a late push. I think that ultimately they need to make some bigger changes. I think they need to get younger. I think that Brian McClellan needs to, live up to what he said, that he needs to pick up that forward with a great goal scoring touch and a veteran defenseman, kind of like the Niskanen and Orpik thing. So this Caps team can get back to being competitive and getting this thing going in the right direction. Because, the next thing that's going to happen, I would say that whoever the next head coach is, if they don't have success in pretty short order, I think that Brian McClellan might be the next guy that is looking for a new job. I love Brian McClellan. I like all the moves, but this is the winning business. It's like show business. It's called show business, not show happy. Same thing goes for this year. The Capitals have got to find a way to get competitive in a hurry. It can't be this long and laborious rebuild that you see sometimes these teams go through. If you can think of one blueprint, think of the New York Rangers, how they kind of struggled for a year and a half after they went through a rebuild, and now look at them, they're in the playoffs. So I think that if the Capitals could use someone like the New York Rangers as a blueprint on how to make this team competitive in a hurry, that would be the right idea. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this abbreviated edition of Locked On Capitals, but this is breaking news. And where else are you going to hear about the Capitals? Nowhere else but Locked On Capitals. So I got you guys covered all off season. Make sure that when you're using your podcatcher of choice, hit that follow or subscribe button. That way you'll know when the new podcasts are available. Also, hop on over to YouTube and hit that subscribe button so we can get those subscribers up. Next week, we will continue to talk about this coaching change more. We'll also talk about any news surrounding players, interviews, that kind of thing. So make sure and subscribe to Locked On Capitals so you are locked on Capitals through this entire offseason. All right, once again, thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, where it's your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.